My name is Elizabeth Simpson, age 35, and I never thought the people who raised me would humiliate me in front of a linen-draped table full of wine glasses and whispered judgment. They called me broke, laughed. My ex sat there with his new girlfriend like I was a ghost at my own family dinner. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached for my coat and handed them the one thing that changed everything. This is the story of how I lost everything and built something better. So get comfortable, because you're exactly where you're meant to be. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're ready for stories that don't just break your heart, they rebuild it. I sat there in silence, the clink of polished silverware echoing against the marble walls of my parents' dining room. My wine glass was untouched. The heirloom chandelier above flickered softly, casting halos across the long table. Every face at that table wore a smirk or a smile, except mine. My brother Charles had just made a toast. "To family," he said with a casual cruelty in his voice. "And to knowing when to admit you've lost the game." His eyes never left mine. The others laughed. My mother swirled her Riesling without a glance. My sister-in-law covered her mouth like she wasn't part of the laughter. My father, well, he just looked tired, distant, as if he'd heard enough of me for one lifetime. I adjusted the pearl clasp on my necklace, the only thing I wore tonight that had belonged to me for longer than a week. I could feel my heartbeat pulsing at the base of my throat. If I'd spoken in that moment, my voice would have cracked. So I didn't. I just smiled. They thought I was finished. But tucked in the lining of my coat, hanging innocently at the door behind me, was the contract. My name in black ink, final and clean, on a downtown penthouse purchase that would shake this smug table to its bones. But we're not there yet, are we? You want to know how I got here? How the golden daughter of the Simpson family, the one who wore ballet flats in college because heels felt too loud, became the one they whispered about at galas. The one whose name was now a punchline passed between bites of roasted duck and glasses of burgundy. The broke one, the divorced one, the one who should have married better. They didn't know what I was building in the dark. And to be honest, for a long time, neither did I. It started 2 years ago, at this very same table, different wine, different wounds. Back then, I still wore my wedding ring. It was loose. I'd lost weight from the stress. Or maybe from the silence that had crept between Thomas and me like frost on a window. Cold, invisible, but growing thicker each morning. We didn't talk anymore. We exchanged calendar invites. That night, my sister Caroline had just returned from Paris. She'd brought macaron boxes for the nieces and Cartier gossip for the adults. The room buzzed with privilege. Caroline wore white, always white. And when she leaned in to hug me, she whispered, "Still with Thomas," as if it were some rare disease. Still with Thomas. I nodded. She patted my back. Pity like perfume. Subtle, but unmistakable. Dinner was a blur of lamb chops and microaggressions. Charles bragged about his real estate firm. Caroline talked about her yoga retreat in Provence. I smiled through it all, pretending I hadn't found Thomas's second phone just 2 weeks earlier, hidden beneath his sock drawer, buzzing with texts that weren't for me. I hadn't told a soul, not even my therapist, just walked through my days like a ghost in Chanel flats, clutching a marriage that had already left me. When the plates were cleared and the conversation turned to next year's family investment, Charles leaned over, swirling his glass of Pinot, and said, "We'll keep it simple this time, Lizzie. Something even you could handle." The laughter that followed felt like a slap made of velvet, soft, elegant, and cruel. I didn't say a word. But that night, after I drove home, alone, to the cold brick house in Lincoln Park, I stood in the center of the marble foyer and pulled off my ring. Just stood there barefoot, the cold seeping into my toes, and said aloud for the first time, "I'm done." But you don't get to leave someone like Thomas Simpson without consequences. My husband was a legacy man, Ivy League, sharp suits, teeth like a politician, and a family like the mafia, just quieter. When I told him I wanted a divorce, he blinked twice and said, "You can't afford to be done." He was right. I'd left my career in marketing years ago to play the role of society wife. I had no clients, no contacts, just a resume that had dust on it and a bank account with his name on every withdrawal. The house was his. The car was leased under his firm's umbrella. Even the art on the walls was cataloged in his trust. So I left with 2 suitcases, a small settlement, and the vague memory of who I used to be. They all thought I'd go crawling back. My mother even said it over tea. "It's never too late to apologize, dear. You could still patch things up before people start talking." People were already talking. I could feel it every time I walked into a room and the conversation shifted. Every time I posted a photo that didn't include Thomas, and every time I said my apartment instead of our home. So I stopped attending. I disappeared. I let the rumors ferment. And I started building in silence. There's something sacred about rock bottom. When you lose everything, even shame, you finally have room to grow. I rented a studio in West Loop above a bakery that smelled like vanilla and desperation. I slept on a borrowed mattress. I answered phones at a friend's startup just to keep the lights on. Then I remembered something. In college, before I met Thomas, I had a knack for brand strategy, colors, messaging, emotional hooks. It came naturally to me. I could look at a product and see its soul, so I started consulting, quietly. 1 client became 2, then 4, then 12. I built websites at night, ghost wrote pitches, ran entire rebrands under fake agency names until I could afford to register my own, Simpson Creative Group. The irony still makes me laugh. No one knew, not Caroline, not Charles, not even my mother. I wanted it that way. I didn't want their fake support. I wanted proof, receipts, leverage. And it came. Last month, I signed a contract to develop the full identity for a luxury eco-tower being built near the lakefront. A $20 million project. And as part of that deal, I was offered the Penthouse. Not a rental, not a lease, a deed. My name, my space, my silence, broken. So here we are, back at this table. Same chairs, different me. I wore black silk and diamond studs. Quiet power. No logos, no ring. When Charles said, "How's that little design thing you're doing?" I smiled and said, "Growing." He laughed. "Well, if you ever want to shadow real players, let me know." The others chuckled. My mother winced but said nothing. My father stirred his coffee like he was anywhere else. I stood up slowly, my heels echoing on the floor like the prelude to war. "Actually," I said, walking to my coat at the door, "I brought something to show you." I reached into the lining pocket, pulled out the thick envelope, heavy with ink, truth, and revenge, and turned back toward the table. Their faces turned expectant, curious, slightly amused. They didn't know. They had no idea what I was about to put in front of them. Before everything unraveled, before the silence, the smirks, the contract in my coat pocket, I used to believe my life was beautiful, not perfect, but elegant, secure, respected. I was Elizabeth Simpson, wife of Thomas Graham Simpson III, partner at one of the most prestigious private equity firms in Chicago. Our lives moved like clockwork through the rhythms of luxury. Black tie galas, fundraisers at the Art Institute, charity brunches where everyone smiled with just enough teeth to show they weren't hungry. Our mornings started with pressed juice, a kiss on the cheek, and 2 unread newspapers at the kitchen counter. The Tribune for him, the Times for me. We rarely read past the headlines. Our conversation was always brief but polished, like everything else in our lives. "You're wearing the Hermes scarf today," he'd ask, scanning me with his usual distracted approval. "It's chilly out," I'd smile, tucking it neatly over my collar. "Good," We have dinner with the Grants tonight. Don't bring up the China tariff thing again, okay? That was us. Polished. Punctual. Predictable. But not happy. At 45, I lived in a house I didn't choose, designed by an architect Thomas admired but never met. The walls were gray. Greige, our decorator corrected me once, because apparently beige wasn't expensive enough. My walk-in closet was the size of a Manhattan studio, with shelves that lit up when you passed your hand near them. It was beautiful. Cold, like a hotel I could never quite check out of. My friends? Well, they weren't really my friends. They were the wives of Thomas's colleagues, women with last names that opened doors. We played tennis. We went to spa weekends. We exchanged expensive candles at holiday parties. No one ever cried. No one ever said they were lonely. That was the rule. If you had wealth, you weren't allowed to be sad. Sadness was for the middle class, but I was, quietly, desperately sad. Still, I had dreams. Not big ones, not anymore. Just small flickers of myself I kept alive in journals hidden in my bedside drawer. Ideas for branding campaigns, color palettes I liked. Mock-ups for skincare labels, candle boxes, boutique hotel names. Things that used to make me feel alive before I became someone's wife. I'd once been sharp, before Thomas, before the dinners and the pearls and the prenups. I'd been good at what I did, not just competent, gifted. My college professor used to say I could see what a brand wanted to be before it did. I landed my first job in Manhattan a week before graduation. Then I met Thomas at a fundraiser in Lake Forest. His charm was like gravity, effortless and inescapable. He looked like a Kennedy, spoke like a professor, and carried himself like a man who had never been told no. "What does a mind like yours want with a career?" he said on our third date. I remember laughing then. "What do you mean? You're meant for something bigger than meetings and deadlines. You should be adored, cared for, protected." He made protected sound like a promise. Now I know it was a warning. At first, his attention felt intoxicating. Flowers sent to the office, surprise weekends in Napa, custom jewelry just because. He introduced me to his world like it was a secret garden. First-class lounges, family crests, friendships that came with offshore accounts. But slowly, I began to disappear in it. The morning after we got engaged, he casually said, "You don't have to work anymore, you know." I'd barely put the ring on. "I like working." He kissed my hand. "You won't need to. Trust me." And I did. That was the assumption I lived by. That love and control could coexist. That surrendering parts of yourself for comfort was a kind of safety, not a sacrifice. Now I know better. The red flags weren't always red. Sometimes they were beige, like the walls, like the silence. The first time I saw the way Thomas handled his father's assistant, belittling her over a calendar mix-up, making her cry, I felt something tighten in my stomach. I remember saying, "You didn't have to do that." He looked at me like I'd just confessed to treason. Weakness gets exploited, Liz. Always has, always will. "I'm doing her a favor." Another time, at a dinner party, he snapped his fingers at me across the table, twice, because I'd misunderstood which wine to pour. He smiled afterward, of course, said it was nothing. But I never forgot the sound. Snap, snap, not my name. Not even a whisper. Just ownership. He had a way of shrinking people while making it look like a gift. He made you feel lucky to be chosen, grateful to be in his orbit. And when you questioned it, he called it love. I remember one night, early in the marriage, I told him I wanted to do a design workshop in New York, just for a weekend. "Why?" he asked, frowning. "Because I miss it. I want to keep my skills fresh." He exhaled through his nose. "Elizabeth, you want to sit in a room full of interns and try to prove you're still relevant?" I said nothing. He wrapped his arm around me, like a blanket soaked in ice. "You don't need that. You have me." At the time, I thought that was love. Now I know it was erasure. Our social calendar was always full. That was Thomas's design. He said routine made people suspicious. We needed to be seen. Every Thursday was cocktails at the club. Saturdays were reserved for foundation events. Sundays, brunch with his family. Oh, his family. The Simpsons were Chicago royalty. Old money. Discreetly powerful. They smiled with tight lips and hugged like sculptures. His mother, Margaret, once told me during a garden party, "Elegance is knowing when to remain silent, especially when you're hurting." I should have known then. I thought I was marrying Thomas. I was really marrying a dynasty. Even our arguments felt pre-approved, like lines from a bad script. He always won, not with yelling, but with silence. Long, icy stretches of nothing that turned rooms into museums. I'd apologize first, just to thaw the air. One night, maybe 3 years in, I told him I felt invisible. He looked up from his phone, blinked once, and said, "That's not a real problem." That line haunted me for years. Still, I tried. Because that's what you do when your life looks perfect from the outside. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that other people have it worse, that you should be grateful. I had closets full of clothes, invitations to everything, a last name that opened doors. But I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed from the gut, or cried without apologizing, or spoken without second-guessing every syllable. The worst part wasn't being unhappy. The worst part was pretending I wasn't. The tipping point came quietly. I'd just come back from a dinner with Caroline. She'd mentioned, in passing, that Thomas had been seen at Soho House. With a brunette, not me. I didn't say anything. But that night, I checked the GPS history on our shared car. There it was. 4 nights that month, parked near West Loop past midnight. I confronted him calmly, like a business partner presenting a discrepancy. He didn't deny it, just shrugged. Don't overreact. I stood there in my silk robe, barefoot on the marble tile, watching the man I'd given 10 years of my life to sip whiskey like I was a stranger asking too many questions. And in that moment, something snapped inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak, just silence, the real kind, the kind that's louder than shouting. That night, I didn't cry. I just opened my laptop, dusted off my old resume, and opened a blank folder titled Elizabeth. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it walks in the front door wearing a tailored suit, pours a drink like it owns the place, and kisses you on the cheek while reeking of someone else's perfume. The truth came quietly, but it didn't come alone. It brought shame, disbelief, fury, and something worse than all of that, confirmation. It started with a phone call. It was a Friday morning. The rain tapped against the windows like a clock running out of patience. I was sipping Earl Grey in the kitchen, wearing one of his button-downs. It still smelled like him, that dry, woody cologne he wore like armor. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I hadn't slept much the night before, thoughts pacing like ghosts across my skull. The call came from an unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it, but something made me answer. A woman's voice, hesitant, shaky. "Is this Elizabeth Simpson?" I froze. "Yes?" Silence. Then, "I don't know how to say this, but I think you deserve to know." The rest came in waves. Her name was Camilla. She was 29. A consultant, whatever that meant. She'd been seeing Thomas for almost a year. She found out he was married 3 months in. By then, she was already in love. He told her we were practically separated, that I was emotionally unstable, that we stayed together for appearances. Appearances. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there. I couldn't feel my legs. That night, I didn't confront him. I waited. I watched him walk in like he always did, coat over his shoulder, jaw set like granite. He poured himself scotch. Didn't ask about my day. Didn't notice that I hadn't moved in hours. When he finally looked at me, I smiled. "How was work?" He raised an eyebrow. "Same as always." I nodded. "Good. Just curious. Who's Camilla?" That was the first time I saw Thomas flinch. It wasn't much. A blink too long, a muscle in his cheek tightening. But it was there. Real. Raw. He laughed. "Excuse me," I repeated it. Slower this time. "Who is Camilla?" He exhaled, looked off to the side like a director waiting for the next scene. "You're being dramatic." I stood. He stayed seated. That's how it always was. Me rising. Him rooted. "She called me," I said. "She told me everything. 10 months. Thomas. 10. He rolled his eyes. "She's unstable. She's young. She's nothing." That's when I lost it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I broke. Quietly. Completely. I walked upstairs, peeled off his shirt, got in the shower, and sat on the cold floor as the water poured over me, fully clothed. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was still. But inside, I was spiraling. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in layers. Slow suffocation. I stopped eating. Nothing tasted like anything. Even my favorite dark chocolate tasted like dust. My skin went pale. I canceled every social engagement. I ignored texts, calls, invitations. I told my mother I had a migraine. I told Caroline I had food poisoning. I told myself, nothing. I barely spoke for days. I'd walk into rooms and forget why I entered. I'd stare at my reflection and wonder who she was. I looked like Elizabeth Simpson, but I didn't feel like her. I didn't feel like anyone. One morning, I stood in front of my closet, wall-to-wall luxury, curated by stylists and seasonal trends, and realized I hated every piece. None of it felt like mine. The colors, the cuts, the brands. It was like wearing someone else's story. I slid down to the floor and sobbed into my knees. Not for him. For me. For the girl I left behind when I married him. For the woman I abandoned while pretending everything was okay. For the parts of myself I'd silenced to fit into his world. Grief and rage, shame and clarity. They all swirled inside me, clashing like waves in a storm. The shame was the loudest. Not for being cheated on. No. But for letting myself disappear long before he betrayed me. For ignoring the signs. For choosing safety over truth. For trading in my fire for a place at his table. But then came the rage. It showed up like an old friend I'd forgotten I had. It started small. I deleted his calendar from my phone. I turned off notifications from our shared accounts. I threw out the cologne I once bought him in Florence. Then came the purge. I cleared my side of the closet, packed 2 suitcases with the only clothes I'd ever bought myself, left the house keys on the marble counter, and wrote a note. Just one line. "You can have your kingdom. I'm building an empire." I moved into a short-term rental with a lumpy bed and creaky floors. It smelled like old coffee and paint. But it was mine. The first night, I slept fully clothed, clutching a heating pad to my chest like it could mend what was broken. I didn't sleep. My eyes stayed open in the dark, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers. My identity had cracked. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a Simpson. I wasn't anyone's. And yet, somewhere in that emptiness, a new voice stirred. Small, quiet, but firm. "You're still here." I started writing again. Not in journals this time, but emails, outreach. I opened an old laptop and began drafting proposals. Branding gigs, small ones. I reached out to past colleagues under a pseudonym, afraid my real name would carry whispers instead of worth. They responded. 1 job became 2. Then 3. I worked late, fueled by instant coffee and grit. I cried between meetings. I spiraled some nights, but I kept going. Because if there was one thing I could still control, it was creation. I blocked Thomas's number, not out of spite, out of survival. He tried to reach me, of course, left voicemails, emails, some cold, some warm. Let's talk. This is getting ridiculous. We can still fix this. But there was nothing left to fix. The real betrayal wasn't Camilla. It wasn't even the cheating. It was the fact that when I broke, when I fell apart, he didn't flinch. He didn't reach. He just watched. That silence told me everything. My family, oh, they knew something was wrong. But they didn't ask. Not really. Charles texted once, "Heard you moved out. Hope you're not doing anything impulsive." Caroline sent a photo of a handbag and said, "Retail therapy always helps me." My mother, she sent a card. No words, just a card, blank inside. That told me everything, too. But collapse isn't the end. It's the rupture before the rise. And though I didn't know it then, on that mattress with springs poking my back, eating microwave soup in silence, I was already rebuilding. Slowly, painfully, honestly. Because sometimes, the worst day of your life is the day you finally wake up. You think once you leave the man, the house, the lies, you're free. But freedom doesn't feel like flying at first. It feels like falling. I moved out, yes. I walked away from the polished hellscape of our marriage, but what I walked into was worse. Nothingness. A blank page. And I didn't know how to hold a pen anymore. They say healing isn't linear. That's true. But what they don't say is how lonely the in-between is. That strange, liminal space where you're no longer who you were, and not yet who you're becoming. That was me. Floating between fragments. My days blurred together. I'd wake up at noon, scroll mindlessly, order takeout I couldn't finish. The smell of pad thai and sadness clung to the apartment walls like wallpaper. I stopped showering regularly. I wore the same oversized sweater every day, the one with the wine stain and sleeves that swallowed my hands. It felt like armor. If I disappeared into it, maybe no one would ask how I was, because I wasn't fine, not even close. I thought working would save me. I threw myself into freelance jobs, chasing deadlines like a lifeline. I branded vegan skincare lines, dental offices, a tech startup run by a guy who used too many exclamation points. I was efficient, polite, invisible, and empty. Every time I hit send on a finished project, a voice inside whispered, "This isn't it," but I didn't listen. I kept running forward so I wouldn't have to look back. Then came the bad decisions. The short-lived dating phase. You know the one? The apps. The men who smelled like too much cologne and talked about crypto. The guys who called me babe after 2 messages and bragged about their Teslas like they invented electricity. There was one man, Derek. Tall, clever, smelled like cedarwood and distraction. He made me laugh, took me to rooftop dinners, called me dangerous with a smile. I let him in too quickly. I wasn't ready. He knew it. When I opened up about Thomas, about the betrayal, the breakdown, he shifted, grew cold, distant. 3 days later, I found out he was still living with his ex. When I asked him why he lied, he said, "You're not my girlfriend, Elizabeth. Don't get emotional." That sentence did something to me. I hung up, deleted the app, and sat on my bathroom floor for an hour, hugging my knees and whispering, "I can't do this again." That's when I went back to therapy. Dr. Whitman. A sharp, silver-haired woman with tortoiseshell glasses and eyes that saw through everything. She didn't coddle. She didn't nod too much. She just held up a mirror and let me sit with what I saw. "Why do you think you attract men like Thomas?" she asked one day, pen tapping her notepad. "Because I'm broken," I said without thinking. She raised an eyebrow. "Or because you still think love has to hurt to be real." That hit harder than anything Thomas ever said. Weeks passed. I started journaling again. Walks in the park became a ritual. I started cooking. Real meals, not microwave sadness. My body slowly returned to me. I started wearing real clothes again, brushing my hair, lighting candles. Not because I had guests, but because I was the guest. I found moments of beauty. But healing is tricky. Because just when you think you're okay, life checks. It was Caroline's birthday. She invited me to the celebration, a rooftop soiree at the Gwen. I hesitated. I wasn't ready. But she insisted. Don't be dramatic, Liz. Just come for a drink. So I went. I wore a black wrap dress, simple gold hoops, red lipstick for courage. I walked in like I belonged, like I was healed. The rooftop was a sea of champagne flutes and forced laughter. Everyone looked tan, tight, and tired. I saw Charles. He raised a glass. I saw my mother, cool, composed, uninterested. Then I saw Thomas, with Camilla, on his arm. She was stunning. Younger, yes, but not the caricature I'd expected. She looked kind, nervous. She clung to his arm like a lifeline. Our eyes met. She knew who I was. I turned to leave. Fast, but not fast enough. Thomas spotted me. Elizabeth? Loud. Too loud. People turned. Faces turned. He smirked. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you were off finding yourself. The air left my lungs. Someone laughed. Caroline's eyes widened. Even Camilla looked embarrassed. I muttered something. Maybe an apology. Maybe a curse. I left. I got in a cab and cried the entire ride home. Not because I still loved him, but because I realized I was still carrying the weight of proving him wrong. That night, I deleted every trace of him. Photos, emails, even the expensive scarf he once gave me. I threw it out the window. It fluttered like a flag of surrender. No more. I opened my laptop, heart pounding. And I made a decision. There was a woman I used to follow. Naomi Singh, an old client from my agency days, back when I had an actual desk and assistant. She ran a boutique interior brand, luxury with soul. We'd lost touch after the marriage. I figured she'd moved on, found someone shinier. But I emailed her anyway, honest, direct, desperate. I'm building again. I'm not sure where it's going yet, but I'm working harder than ever. If you know anyone looking for full-scale brand development, I'm here, hungry, focused, ready. She replied within an hour. Let's talk, tomorrow. I have something you might be perfect for. We met at a downtown cafe. She looked the same, sharp blazer, soft eyes. She hugged me. No judgment, no gossip, just presence. She slid a folder across the table. Inside, a real estate development proposal. A luxury eco-high-rise near Millennium Park. 22 floors. High-end clientele. She was leading the interiors. The developers needed branding, identity, naming, launch strategy, big budget, bigger visibility. My hands trembled. Why me? I whispered. She smiled. Because you've lived what they're selling. Reinvention, power, comeback. That's the brand. And I trust you to tell that story. For the first time in a year, I exhaled. I threw myself into the project like it was oxygen. I mapped mood boards, designed logos, crafted taglines that made men in suits nod solemnly. My pitch was airtight, elegant, bold. I named the building Lumen, Latin for light. It was everything I hadn't had, everything I was becoming. And then, the twist. 3 weeks before launch, the lead developer offered me the Penthouse unit, at cost, as part of a bonus incentive package for exclusive branding rights on his next 5 projects. The contract, 17 pages, finalized, sealed, and the name on the deed, Elizabeth. No middle name, no Simpson, just me. But to finalize it, I had to cut something else. The contract had a clause. A public declaration of independence from previous business affiliations, including any ties to Simpson and Graham Holdings, Thomas's firm. which meant I had to forfeit all passive revenue I still had access to, a small annual dividend that Thomas had quietly agreed to during the divorce. My final financial safety net. I stared at the paper, $48,000 a year, or full independence. I signed. Because you can't hold on to the past and build your future with the same hand. That night, I cried, not out of regret, but because I finally knew the difference between losing and letting go. Transformation doesn't arrive with confetti. It comes quietly, in the form of small, sacred choices made when no one's watching. It began with mornings, not the kind I used to know, racing through blow-dries and espresso shots before sliding into the passenger seat of Thomas's life. No, these mornings were mine. I'd wake with the sun, make coffee slowly, stretch barefoot in the kitchen, letting sunlight pool around my ankles. I played jazz while watering the plants, not to impress, not to prepare, just to be. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing toward anything, and somehow, everything began coming toward me. My apartment got a makeover too. Nothing drastic, just alive. I painted the walls a warm ivory, added brass fixtures, linen drapes that billowed when the window was cracked just right. I filled shelves with books I'd always meant to read, lit candles for no reason. The space didn't look like luxury, it looked like me. No more curated perfection, just presence. My body changed too, not in size, but in sensation. I walked more, moved slower, breathed deeper. I started Pilates at a small studio run by a woman named Jade, who spoke like poetry and moved like silk. She once said during class, "You don't hold tension. Tension holds you." I almost cried right there on the mat. My body had held years of clenched silence. Now, it was learning to let go. Professionally, things exploded. Lumen launched with a campaign that turned heads. And not just in Chicago. My name was quietly passed among developers, boutique hotels, wellness brands. I started turning down work, hired a part-time assistant named Maya, a recent grad with eyes full of spark. I built something real, from scratch, from ashes. And every time I signed a new contract under Simpson Creative Group, a part of me whispered, "You made it, without him, without them, without asking for permission." But here's the truth. Success wasn't the reward. Peace was. For the first time in my adult life, I could sit in silence and not feel like I was disappearing. Love? That was unexpected. His name was Julian. I met him at an art gallery opening downtown, one of those events I used to get dragged to for show. This time, I went for me. He stood by a canvas, sipping ginger beer instead of wine, reading the artist's bio out loud under his breath like it was a monologue. I laughed. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Busted." We talked for 2 hours. Not about work, not about exes, just life, curiosity, art, time, how no one wears watches anymore, and that feels like a metaphor. Julian was calm, present, thoughtful. When I told him about my past, about the collapse and the rebuild, he didn't flinch, didn't offer advice or platitudes. He just said, "That must have taken more strength than most people ever find." I didn't fall in love. I rose into it, slowly, softly. With both feet on the ground, we didn't rush anything. I'd learned enough about rushing, about performing, about letting someone else define the shape of my life. With Julian, there was no performance, just breath, space, laughter over grocery store sushi, long walks that ended in nowhere, dinners we cooked together, barefoot, dancing around each other in the kitchen like it was choreographed. He didn't complete me, he didn't fix me, he just saw me, and I let him. But here's the thing about peace. Eventually, it must face the world that once broke you. The invitation came on linen cardstock with gold trim. My mother never texted invitations. She sent them embossed. Family dinner, formal, Sunday, 7 p.m., RSVP. I stared at it for a full minute. There it was. The final test. The last battlefield. Same house, same table, same players, different me. I told Julian I was going. Alone. He didn't question it. Just looked at me and said, "Wear the black dress. The one that makes you walk like you own the world." The week leading up to it, I felt the tension build like a storm in my chest. Not fear, not anymore. Just awareness. I wasn't going back to prove anything. I was going to witness it all with new eyes, to walk into the room where I was once small and stay full-sized. My assistant Maya asked me that Friday if I had weekend plans. I smiled. Just dinner. Sunday arrived with gray skies and quiet confidence. I wore the black silk dress Julian mentioned. Not too tight, not too loud. Elegant. Grounded. Paired it with low heels, soft curls, and a calm heart. The contract was in my coat pocket. Folded. Sealed. Final. I didn't plan to show it, unless they gave me a reason. As I drove toward my parents' house, a mansion nestled between hedges and Judgment, I passed the old routes I used to take during the marriage. The same turns, same intersections. But I wasn't the same woman in the car. That woman used to flinch at stoplights, at questions, at cold silences. This woman had edges, voice, vision. I pulled into the driveway, paused, took one deep breath, and walked inside. The table was already full. Caroline in pearls, Charles in a smug navy suit, my mother in lavender, my father staring at his wine like it held better memories. They looked up as I entered. For a split second, no one spoke. Then Caroline stood. "Lizzie, wow, you look alive," I offered, smiling. She blinked, laughed too quickly. "Yes, that." I took my seat, poured my own wine. No one moved to serve me. Fine. Charles was the first to crack. "So, still doing that design thing?" That word again. Thing. I smiled. "Business is good. We just signed 5-year branding rights for a new luxury development. Lumen." His eyebrows twitched. Just a flicker. "Never heard of it." "You will." My mother cleared her throat. Changed the subject. They still hadn't asked about the divorce, or Camilla, or how I'd survived. It didn't matter. I didn't need them to ask anymore. Dinner passed in tension-wrapped politeness. I watched them as if through glass, detached, observing. Same patterns, same scripts. But I wasn't playing anymore. And then came the moment Charles raised a glass. To family. And knowing when to admit you've lost the game. His eyes locked on mine. Laughter, soft, polite, icy. I didn't flinch. I stood, walked to my coat, slid the envelope from the pocket, turned, and smiled. But that's the next chapter. The weight of the envelope in my hand felt like history. Not just paper, but proof of rebirth, of self-respect, of everything they thought I'd never become. I turned from the coat rack slowly, deliberately, and walked back to the dining room. Each step sounded louder than it should have, like the floor was listening. Charles paused mid-sip. Caroline lowered her fork. My mother placed her napkin on her lap, her face unreadable. My father stared at his wine like it had somewhere better to be. No one spoke. I stood at the head of the table, not asking permission, not needing it, just standing. And for the first time in my life, they listened. "I brought something," I said softly, my voice steady. I placed the envelope gently on the table, right in front of Charles. His fingers twitched. "What's this?" he asked, smirking as if this were still a game. "Proof," I said, "that losing me was the most expensive mistake any of you ever made." No one moved. He opened the flap, slid the contract out. His eyes scanned the first page, the logo, the numbers. The name, my name. Then he hit the deed. Penthouse 2201. Lakefront view. Exclusive rights. Owner, Elizabeth M. Simpson. His smirk faded. Silence stretched. He looked up. Blinked. Once. Twice. How? That one word held everything he couldn't say. The disbelief, the envy, the panic. I didn't answer. He didn't deserve my story. Only the result. Caroline reached over and took the paper. She read slowly, her lips parting. I watched her posture change, the subtle stiffening, the recognition that something irreversible had happened. She handed it to my mother like it burned. My mother took it, read it, said nothing, just nodded. A single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all she could offer, and yet, it felt like an earthquake. Then Thomas's voice cut through the room like a knife. You did this. Without me. I hadn't even noticed him walk in. But there he was, standing in the archway. Dark coat, sharp jaw, same cologne. His presence still heavy, but not over me anymore. He looked from me to the contract, then back again. You bought a penthouse. I met his eyes. Calm, unapologetic. No, I stepped forward. I earned it. He exhaled through his nose, that old patronizing sigh. You always were dramatic. No, Thomas, I was always underestimated. There's a difference. He walked slowly toward the table, picking up the contract, skimmed the final page. His hand gripped the edge harder than necessary. I watched his eyes move, calculation, realization, resentment. You used my name to get in. That was his out, his last thread of control. I tilted my head slightly. Actually, I removed it. That's what closed the deal. Silence. Then, the truth arrived. Not in words, but in his eyes. Because in that moment, for the first time, he saw me. Not the wife he shaped. Not the quiet shadow at his side. Not the placeholder he controlled. But the version of me he never imagined would survive without him. And in that reflection, he saw the man he could have been, if he hadn't chosen to dominate instead of partner, if he'd supported instead of silenced, if he'd loved me as I was, instead of trying to possess me. That's what broke him, not the money, not the penthouse, the mirror. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice, just stood in the stillness and let the silence work harder than any insult could. Caroline shifted in her seat. Charles looked away. My mother set down her wine. Thomas? He cleared his throat, forced a smile, the kind that hides bruised ego beneath polished teeth. So, what now? He asked. It was desperation disguised as curiosity. I stepped closer, not threatening, just sovereign. Then I said the line, the one I had waited a year to speak. Soft, precise, lethal? Now, I go home, and you stay here, exactly where you left me. The words landed like a blade dipped in silk. He didn't flinch. He froze. That was the difference. Thomas was a man used to control. And for the first time, he realized the door had closed behind me, and I wasn't reaching back. There was no second chance, no re-entry, no version of this story where he remained the center. He wasn't the villain anymore. He was just irrelevant. I turned, coat in hand, and walked toward the door. As I reached the entryway, my mother's voice broke through, quiet, fragile. Elizabeth. I turned slightly. Her eyes met mine for the first time all evening. There was no apology, just something close to mourning, like she finally understood the cost of silence. You're not coming back, are you? I looked around that house, the portraits, the china, the stiff chairs, the history. Then I looked down at my own hands, steady, bare, unshaking, and I smiled. No. I stepped outside into the night. The air was crisp, the sky clear. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's just the quiet closing of a door behind you. Some endings don't need applause, they need quiet. A soft landing, a deep exhale. The kind that comes not from winning, but from walking away with your soul intact. That night, after the dinner, I drove past the old house one last time. The lights were still on. Through the front windows, I could see them, silhouettes moving like ghosts in candlelight. But the woman they used to shape, to shrink, to silence, she was no longer inside. She was behind the wheel, heading home, to her home. The penthouse wasn't ready yet. I had a month before move-in. But something inside me shifted the moment I signed that contract. It wasn't about the space, or the view, or the floors imported from Florence. It was about the name, Elizabeth M. Simpson. Not someone's wife, not someone's daughter, not someone's mistake. Just me. In the weeks that followed, life slowed, not from sadness, but from serenity. I made new routines, lit incense in the mornings, kept fresh tulips on the table, took walks without my phone, stopped checking emails after 6 p.m. I learned how to cook risotto properly, burned the first batch, laughed anyway. Julian and I would meet at the farmer's market on Saturdays, split strawberries, and talk about everything but the past. We were two people growing toward the sun, not leaning on each other for light, but sharing it. Sometimes he stayed over, sometimes he didn't, and it was enough. I wrote letters I never sent, to my mother, to Caroline, even to Thomas. Not out of bitterness, but to make peace with the things they would never say, and that I no longer needed. Here's one I remember, word for word. Dear Thomas, you didn't break me. You revealed where I had already gone missing. Thank you for that. I don't forgive you out of mercy. I forgive you because I am no longer carrying what you did. I hope you find your peace. I found mine. Elizabeth. I burned that letter on my balcony the night before I moved. Watched the ash lift into the wind like old skin being released. Moving day was rainy, the kind of soft drizzle that smears the skyline and makes everything feel like a painting. Julian helped carry boxes. Maya brought champagne. We laughed over pizza on the kitchen floor, surrounded by cardboard and dreams. I walked from room to room barefoot, touching every surface, letting the space speak back. The view from the 22nd floor was unreal. Lake Michigan stretched out like glass, boats like floating freckles. The city pulsed quietly below. I stood there at twilight, arms folded, just watching, not thinking, not wanting, just being. I hung no portraits, no family heirlooms, just art I loved, and mirrors, not to check appearances, but to remind myself that I am here, present, whole. The first night I slept there alone, I woke up before dawn. No nightmares, no startles. Just light, soft, gray, spilling across the hardwood like a beginning. I stood by the window in my robe, sipping tea, watched the world wake up beneath me, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Weightlessness, not from absence, but from presence. People ask sometimes what healing feels like. It's not fireworks. It's a warm towel after a cold swim. It's finishing a meal and realizing you didn't count calories or punish yourself. It's laughing without flinching, crying without apologizing, and walking into a room without scanning it for someone else's approval. It's silence and knowing you're not lonely, just whole. Caroline texted once. A photo of us from 2015, no caption. I didn't reply. Some connections don't need closure, just distance. My mother sent a card on my birthday. This one had words. I see you. 3 small words. They didn't heal everything, but they softened something. I let that be enough. As for Thomas, I don't know where he is. I don't need to. I don't Google him. I don't check Camilla's Instagram. I don't replay old arguments in my head like broken records. Because I'm not in that story anymore. I wrote a new one. with gold trim and hard-earned peace. One evening, I hosted a dinner at the Penthouse, just a small group: Julian, Maya, Naomi, a couple of clients who'd become friends. We ate on the balcony under string lights, passed wine, shared stories, laughed until we cried. At one point, someone asked, "So, Elizabeth, what's next?" I paused, looked out over the skyline, the stars peeking through city haze, and I said, "More of this, more joy, more simplicity, more truth. And maybe, finally, a garden on the terrace." And that was it. No grand finale, no revenge montage, just a woman standing in her own light, peaceful, powerful, unapologetically home.